Hey, Cornerstone, it's Scott, and today's Cornerstone connection is coming from 1 Corinthians chapter 9. The Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 9:16, "Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel." Can you feel the force of his words there? Woe is me if I don't tell the world that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, who died for our sin and rose from the dead so that people might be saved. This is a message that Paul had to proclaim. And oftentimes throughout his letters, he says, and I want the recipients of this letter to imitate me. Today's passage is on proclaiming the gospel, the way the Apostle Paul did it, and I believe a way that we should imitate. Look with me at 1 Corinthians 9:19. Paul says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win more Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some." You see, in the Apostle Paul's day, there were two groups of people. There were those under the law and those outside the law. Those under the law were the Jewish people, and those outside of the law were the Greeks and the pagans. And these two groups were vastly different from each other. They had different worldviews and different belief systems. They had different sets of morality, different questions about life, and different answers to those questions. And both groups had different troubles with the gospel. And because of these differences, Paul made his priority to understand them, to understand their worldviews and their beliefs. And the way he did that is he immersed himself in their lives. He established relationships with the Jews and with the non-Jews. He didn't just want to learn about their culture, he wanted to become a part of their culture. And he says, "To the Jews I became as a Jew, and those outside the law I became as one outside the law." He didn't just want to understand them, he became one of them. And that is a question we need to ask ourselves here. Are we immersing ourselves so deeply into the lives of the people in our very communities that we understand how they tick? That we understand what they believe? Do we know our neighbors' hopes and dreams and ambitions? Do we know their worldviews, their beliefs? Do we know what troubles them in life and what troubles them about Christianity? You see, if we're not careful, we can become so separated from our culture just because we're busy, perhaps, or we are so different from certain people, we don't really want to get to know them. If we're not careful, we become holy huddles, if you will. And we don't have a relationship all of a sudden with the people around us. And consequently, we lose out on opportunities to have an effective witness. Church, I want to let you know that a day is upon us where people are not walking into churches like they used to. The come and see approach that took hold of the church growth movement for the last 50 years is really no more. And now the new strategy is go and tell. It's really not a new strategy, it's an old strategy, one that Jesus employed with his very disciples. He called them to follow him, to learn from him, and he equipped them, mobilized them, and sent them out to go and tell the world the good news about Jesus. That's what the Apostle Paul did. He went out and told people the good news, but in so doing, he immersed himself in culture. He got to know the people around him so that he could contextualize the gospel in a way that drove straight to their heart. You see, church, we need to bring the message of Jesus into the everyday spaces that we occupy. Maybe you work at the hospital and you need to bring Jesus with you into work and love the people around you and get to know people. Maybe you frequent a coffee shop or a restaurant. You need to look for opportunities to bring the presence of Jesus and the message of Jesus into those spaces. You need to build friendships with people. Strike up conversation with strangers. Learn from them. Learn their stories. Share your story and share God's story with them. Might you become all things to all people that you might win some. Live as a missionary. Live as a missionary right here in our community by getting to know the people around you, immersing yourself in culture, and sharing the good news of Jesus Christ.